Jacob Pepper, surely you can nominate your children as the only beneficiaries to a trust so mum and dad can't get at it if they separate. If not, how could you protect the assets for children in case of separation? This is a really great question, and this is forming part of our family trust series, so I'm keen to unpack this. Now, it is a common misconception that people believe that a family trust is an asset protection vehicle for relationship breakdown. In other words, we've got a husband and a wife or a couple who are married or in a committed relationship. A family trust is established. Assets are held within that family trust, and just as a result of having that family trust and those assets segmented out of your own individual name, they're going to be excluded from a family law matter or a separation. Now, I'm not a family lawyer. I can only speak from experiences that I've seen from my clients, so I advocate that you do go get family law advice in relation to this, but it is more complicated than you might think. Now, just because you have a family trust that has the children listed as the beneficiaries and excludes your significant other does not mean that it is not going to form part of the marital estate. What we need to understand in a family law matter is that family law matters require all assets that have control or have a relationship by way of an entitlement to be considered for the purposes of that. And in many cases, it's by negotiation. So let's say, for example, that you do set that up and your significant other then says, well, hey, we've got all of these assets that are in a family trust. That formed part of our estate. We've built this together. This has been part of our marital estate. It can be clawed in, okay? So there is essentially only really one mechanism that can be used in order to avoid these kinds of things happening or significantly reduce the risk associated with these types of things being clawed in, and that is a binding financial agreement. And a binding financial agreement is something that needs to be put together by a lawyer, and what it essentially does is a list of all of the assets and liabilities that each party brought into the relationship, or assets and liabilities that are going to be ring-fenced in the event of a relationship breakdown. And it is essentially an agreement between the two parties of how those assets and liabilities are going to be treated in the event of that relationship breakdown. So what we typically see happen is as follows. Let's say, for example, you have an existing business and you have an existing portfolio. You have wealth independent that you created prior to getting into a relationship. You get into the relationship, and your significant other, you say, hey, look, I want to draw a line in the sand that all of the assets that I have created prior to our relationship are mine. Anything that you've created prior to our relationship is yours. And then anything that we create moving forwards will be split in the event of us splitting up, okay? The idea that you say, oh, well, all of my wealth that I create now and into the future is not going to form part of that, of a settlement. Good luck getting anybody to agree to that. We've seen instances whereby that has been overturned because people have been forced into signing a binding financial agreement under duress, and it has not been on fair terms. So the other party also needs to get legal advice. We had a situation recently with a client who essentially had a binding financial agreement that they'd sent to their significant other. They had a substantial amount of wealth, and they were trying to get this person to commit. They hadn't signed it, and they didn't want to put pressure. It's a kind of awkward situation, and they were getting up to the marriage, and essentially they created an ultimatum that the binding financial agreement needed to be signed if the marriage was going to take place. The individual signed it, and then essentially the binding financial agreement was in place. Many years later, they subsequently separated, and the individual, the wife in this particular circumstance, said that they were put under duress to sign the binding financial agreement, otherwise they weren't going to get married, and that was actually overturned and essentially was null and void. There's family trusts involved, there's companies involved, there's all of these assets, these asset structures are in place, and still has not provided a level of protection. So once again, these things aren't bulletproof. You need to make sure that you get the right advice. You need to understand the circumstances in which these documents are getting put into place and the circumstances in which you're getting the other party to agree, and it needs to be in good faith. So this is just a crash course. In point, family trust is not necessarily going to protect you from those things. The best thing that you can do is have objective, transparent conversations with your significant other. I'm of the belief that you should be drafting your divorce papers before you get married. In other words, have the conversation of saying, look, I hope that we're together and happy ever after, but I think it's important for us to be able to just establish the ground rules now whilst we're in good stead, we're not heated, our emotions aren't elevated, and for us to define the rules that we're going to play by in the event that things don't work out. Okay, this is the assets that I've got. This is the assets that you've got. This is what we've created together. How do we want this to be treated? What do we leave to the kids? What do we take? What do we want that to look like? And then work together in partnership in order to get that document put together and then agree to it in good faith. This is the best way, right? Because if we can do it and we can have the conversations and we can dictate the rules, God forbid if anything does happen, then we've got accountability to those rules because we've created them together. The issue is for most people, they get very emotional about this. Like, what are you saying? They see it as a personal attack. Oh, well, you're thinking about leaving me, yada, 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 and people get very defensive. So it's very important that you have the ability to control the emotions of the situation, to express your intentions, and to do your best to try and work with the other party to make sure that they can reciprocate. I think it's a very telltale sign of what will happen in the future in the event that the relationship doesn't work out based on how they choose to respond. So I hope this is helpful. Any questions, let us know. Make sure you get advice.